Awesome. So thank you for joining us today. This is the last session of our series of webinars relating to accessibility from eCampus Ontario. My name is Laura Lawopa, and I'm a librarian with eCampus Ontario. And joining me today is Sarah, who is also a librarian with eCampus, and our presenters, Lindsay and Ryan. Before we begin the session today, I would like to share a land acknowledgement. The offices of eCampus Ontario are located in downtown Toronto. They are within the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and Wendat peoples. I'm joining this session today from Sudbury, which is on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the people of Turtle Island, the Atikameksheng, and the Anishinaabe, and I would also like to recognize the Wanapitei First Nation and the Métis Nation of Ontario. Sarah has shared some links to land acknowledgements in the chat. Please feel free to share your own acknowledgement as well. And now I would like to pass it over to our presenters, Lindsay and Ryan, who will be talking about accessibility standards today.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Lindsay Robinson. I'm the Digital Media Manager at the University of Guelph Library. And Ryan Moore is the Digital Accessibility Coordinator at the University of Guelph Library as well. And we help people at the library create accessible content. So before we kind of jump into our presentation, it would be great if we could just get a bit of a sense of how you yourselves are feeling about standards. So Ryan, can you move to the next slide, please? So in the chat, if you could just share one word that comes to mind when you hear standard, when you hear the word standard. So we'll take a moment to wait for you to add any kind of ideas that you might have or feelings that come to mind when you hear the word standard. We hear WCAG, consistent, rigid, useful reference, mandated, general. Clear ethics. Thank you everybody for sharing. Okay, we can go to the next slide. And we just have one question here. I'm just going to launch a poll. So you don't have to add it in the chat, but you can if you want to. Hopefully this works. So you can choose all that makes sense to you, but when it comes to standards, what are the most curious or confused about? So finding the standards, navigating the website, understanding what is being asked, knowing whether or not you met the standard, identifying gaps, or all of the above. You can choose whatever makes most sense to you in that list. So it looks like most people are really concerned about knowing whether or not you've actually met the standard. How do we know whether or not we've achieved what's being asked of us? But it looks like everybody, there's kind of answers from all over. There's 4 out of 15 for finding the standards, 2 out of 15 for navigating the website, 3 out of 15 for understanding what is being asked. It's 9 out of 15 for knowing whether or not they've met the standard. Identifying the gaps in the standards is 4 out of 15, and 6 out of 15 is all of the above. So thanks very much. It's great to have, oh, sorry, I forgot to share the results. So it's great to have an understanding of kind of what people are most concerned about when it comes to standards. Okay, so I'm just going to close those. Okay, so today we are going to review current standards. So we're going to look a little bit at the AODA, as well as some other things that have come up, like the post-secondary recommendations. We're going to talk about WCAG. We're also going to talk a bit about the limitations and challenges of the standards themselves. Then we're going to look a little bit more closely at the standards for different formats. So this talk that we're going to have today is really about content creation. It's not about the platforms. There are standards for specific platforms and making sure that those work, but we're really about talking about content today. So things like EPUB. We're going to talk about standards related to readability, which is really for all content. We're going to talk about documents as well as video and audio. We've highlighted a few resources that we think will be really helpful for you to tackle understanding the resources and then applying them and making sure that you are meeting those standards. And then we'll hopefully have a bunch of time at the end for a Q&A. So next slide, please. So accessibility standards and regulation. So the first thing we'll talk about is accessibility for Ontario's Disabilities Act. I'm sure everybody is familiar with this. It was established in 2005, which was a really long time ago, with the goal of achieving accessibility for Ontarians with disabilities on or before January 1st, 2025, which is not far from now, right? It's right around the corner. The AODA allowed government to develop, implement, and enforce accessibility standards. So the Integrated Accessibility Standards Regulation contains five standards, which include employment, transportation, design of public spaces, and customer service, as well as information and communication standards, which is the section of the AODA that pertains specifically to creating accessible open educational resources. So the information and communication standards contains guidance on accessible formats, accessible websites and web content, which is WCAG. It uses WCAG 2.0 AA compliance, of AA level compliance, which we'll get to in a minute about what that means. And there's specific information about education and training resources and materials needing to be made accessible upon request, as well as producers of education or training materials. So people who produce that type of content needing to make sure that it is accessible upon request or conversion ready upon request. Next slide. So thinking about the fact that the AODA is old, right? There have been recent reviews of portions of the AODA as well as recommendations. So the first one is Information and Communication Standards Review in 2020. It acknowledges that standards are not keeping pace with technology. Think about how quickly technology has changed, particularly within the last 10 years. And then it came up with some key recommendations about where they felt like there were gaps within the information communication standards, particularly around defining practicability, which in the current standard is exceptionally broad, and it acts in some cases like a loophole for being able to actually create accessible content. It also makes recommendations about removing exemptions, such as intranet and extranet, live captioning, and audio descriptions. The intranet and extranet is a huge thing, I think, for higher ed institutions. I mean, so often a lot of stuff is like, well, it's not accessible, we'll put it behind authentication, but that's one of the recommendations, is to remove that distinction. In 2022, the post-secondary education standards recommendations were released, which was really about making post-secondary education more accessible. There's a lot of recommendations, and I recommend reviewing it and thinking about it as a best practice kind of thing. But what we want to draw attention to is one specific section that is about making accessible educational materials. So it's really about making sure that textbooks and reading materials are available in multiple formats and can be made in alternative formats and within a reasonable time frame. And that all course materials, including multimedia, should be in an accessible format. And really the emphasis is switching from a by request to being more proactive. So rather than waiting for somebody to request an accessible format, it's really switching to being more proactive. So how can we provide accessible materials upfront? And then Rich Donovan completed the 4th review of the AODA last spring. And his final report was released just at the end of 2023 to the public. And it was similar really to all previous AODA reviews, which was just basically acknowledging the fact that Ontario is not accessible and is not going to meet kind of its timeline, and acknowledges a lot of limitations of the AODA. So these are kind of some reading that we would recommend that you investigate to get a better understanding of some a better understanding of kind of like where we are in accessibility and where we have to go. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the web content guidelines for the AODA are based off of the Use Web Content Accessibility Guidelines with WCAG as the kind of as the standard that we're supposed to meet. So that's WCAG, and it's the closest thing that we have as to an international accessibility standard. And it's structured around the POUR principles. The POUR principles are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. I really recommend investigating the resource that's linked there. It's great to understand, kind of have that broader context of what that POUR principles are. It helps kind of frame the rest of WCAG quite well. Each principle has guidelines with testable success criteria. Success criteria have levels of compliance. So there's A level, AA, and AAA. Supporting materials, so quick reference, understanding techniques and test rules to help meet requirements, to meet those standards. And the AODA stipulates that websites and web content apply to WCAG 2.0 AA. And as I mentioned before, there are exceptions. So the exception for captioning for live videos and audio descriptions for pre-recorded content. Next slide. But like we mentioned before, things are old. And so WCAG 2.0 was published in 2008. So you can imagine how far removed it is from current technology. 2.1 was published in 2018 and adds 1 guideline and 17 success criteria. 2.2 was published in 2023 and adds 9 success criteria. So 2.1 and 2.2 really improve accessibility for 3 major groups: users with cognitive and learning disabilities, users with low vision, and users with disabilities on using mobile devices. And all are backwards compatible. So if you're meeting 2.2, will allow you to meet 2.1 and 2.0. Okay, so thinking about really working towards meeting that higher level of compliance with 2.2 or 2.1 rather than just meeting 2.0. So we can move to the next slide. So we're talking about standards today, but Ryan and I thought it was really important to talk a little bit about how standards alone don't really guarantee the accessibility of something. And so there's this quote from W3C that I'm going to read to you. So it says, when designers, developers, and project managers approach accessibility as a checklist to meet these standards, the focus is only on the technical aspects of accessibility. And as a result, the human interaction aspect is often lost and accessibility is not achieved. So really it's looking for ways to integrate usability testing to ensure that people can actually interact with the content we've made. We have conversations at work about things can be accessible in theory, but in practice, they present additional barriers. So really working in that additional workflow for usability testing, as well as using kind of automated checkers and manual checks. So some key takeaways from this very, very quick overview of the standards that we use. AODA is due for an update. So think of it as a very baseline for accessibility, but there are definitely gaps and limitations to that. So we generally recommend looking to things like the post-secondary standard for WCAG 2.2, thinking about those as kind of more the best practices that we want to work towards. It's really better to address accessibility issues kind of proactively to ensure future regulation, because we are so close to that next level, right? Knowing the understanding the AODA is so old and how much technology has changed and how we use it has changed so much, really thinking about how to improve the way that we're thinking about accessibility and how we're creating content and assessing content. So for WCAG 2 update considerations, when you are doing your testing, if you're assessing something or building something, think about adding mobile testing to your workflow. So many people use screens. I mean, people in university now are kind of like the cell phone generation, and so they do so much on a phone or on a tablet. Content should work with multiple screen orientations, knowing that people do turn things, right? They work in different ways. Content should reflow without the need for scrolling in 2 dimensions, and review your interactive content. New requirements for draggable content within WCAG 2.2. We aren't going to go into interactive content within this presentation, but I'll just note that there are specific WCAG requirements for interactive content that you might want to consider if you do things that require interaction. Always implement usability testing into your workflow, like I mentioned in the previous slide, and always supplement automated checkers with manual checks. There's just some things that automated checkers just can't do yet. They lack the context and everything in order to make appropriate assessments of things. Okay, I think I'm handing it over to Ryan now.
Okay, yeah, I just see there's a quick question. So the WCAG standard, is it standard created by W3C? The answer to that is yes. So W3C is the World Wide Web Consortium, and they have the Web Accessibility Initiative, which kind of publishes a lot of not only WCAG, but a lot of the things we'll see that kind of sit underneath WCAG, which we could talk about now. So we're going to transition to standards for some more popular OER formats. And we just have one quick poll. So we were interested in what types of OERs you create or use, and you can select all that apply. So we had EPUB, videos, documents, websites. Are there others that you're producing, or do you produce all of the above? Okay, so I think we're seeing a lot of documents, videos, websites, some all of the above, some others. Journals can count as documents for sure. There's lots of different formats. A document kind of encompasses so many different formats, but we are going to use it as a format that we're going to go over today. So, okay, thank you so much. I'm just going to move on from there. We're going to talk about EPUB first, I think, because, you know, of all the things we'll talk about, EPUB can encompass so many different aspects and can really create a really usable and accessible document. So I want to go over what EPUB is specifically. So EPUB uses the open web platform to create content, right? So it's going to use HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and SVG for content authoring. And there is a specification. So I think what's important to note about a lot of these different formats like EPUB and PDF is they're not kind of static things. They're constantly evolving. And with each version or iteration of a specification for a format such as EPUB or PDF, you're going to get a lot of new features, a lot of new usability. So I think one of the challenges when we talk about accessibility for OERs is there's two things we're doing here is we're kind of evolving with the format as it does, you know, as content authoring platforms also evolve. There's a lot of stuff we're learning there. And then alongside that, what we're also seeing is kind of the accessibility standards and regulations and best practices also evolve. So we're kind of constantly upskilling when we're talking about not just accessibility standards, but also the specifications for specific formats as well. So EPUB, like I said, is really great because it uses established web accessibility techniques. And what the real advantage here is that it's going to help us ensure a really high level of accessibility. Also allows you to leverage a lot of the resources we've used for web accessibility, which is by far the most plentiful out there. So in terms of, if you think of like guides, checkers, and things like that, EPUB is going to allow you a lot of resources when we're trying to create an accessible EPUB. I think the challenge here, and something that we'll see with different formats, is the more technical a format tends to be, the steeper the learning curve, but also the higher level of accessibility it tends to allow you to create. So a little bit of a generalization there, but something that I found over the course of my career. And so when we talk about, we have EPUB accessibility specifications here because we don't have a standard for EPUB, what we have is the WCAG standard that we're applying to WCAG, and then we have these two specifications that are going to allow you to use WCAG and then use EPUB within kind of the umbrella of WCAG. So we have two specifications here. We have Accessibility 1.0, which was released in 2017, and 1.1, which was updated in 2023. 1.1 is published by W3C as a recommendation, so the same people who's kind of producing WCAG. And the specifications have two key sections. There's actually three, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but the two we're going to outline today are discoverability. So metadata containing key accessibility information is really important to creating an accessible EPUB. And then we have accessible publications. And this section has three kind of subsections in it. It's going to outline how we're going to apply WCAG conformance to the EPUB format. It's going to talk about specific EPUB requirements, so requirements that are specific to the format. And then we have conformance reporting, which we're going to talk about a lot today because that kind of ties into that discoverability aspect. And we're also going to highlight these accessibility techniques. So these are a part of WCAG that are released. And so the techniques themselves provide guidance on meeting WCAG success criteria. So by meeting all of the techniques, you're not meeting WCAG conformance, but it's going to help you. It's specific techniques that relate to whatever it may be. So ARIA has a set of techniques, PDF has a set of techniques, EPUB has a set of techniques. And I found when I was learning a lot of this stuff, the techniques were very helpful. So we did want to kind of provide some guidance in terms of pointing those out as well. So the first major section of this EPUB accessibility specification is discoverability. So the key challenge we're going to find with, please make sure your mics are muted. So the key challenge we have with EPUB is there's so many different reading modalities that some content cannot meet broad accessibility requirements. So when we talk about kind of the third section, that's kind of, optimized publications. And the important thing with EPUB is because we have so many different reading modalities, often what we'll do is we will create an EPUB that meets either the specifications of that reading modality, or it's going to meet the needs of a specific set of users. So because you might not be able to meet a broader accessibility standard such as WCAG, we can still have an accessible EPUB, which is not, it's somewhat counterintuitive, but I think we just really need to think about EPUB as kind of a kind of really broad and ranging format. Like you can access it through your phone, you can access it on the web, you can access it through a Kindle or a Kobo or something like that. So, and those are drastically different versions of EPUB, really. So the way that we kind of address this challenge is with discoverability. So we're going to create accessible metadata that allows users to determine if the content will meet their needs. So again, a little proactive here in terms of we're not asking people to go into the EPUB and then for them to discover whether or not it will fit their needs. We're trying to be upfront, proactive, and let them know whether or not the EPUB will fit their needs from the start. And so for your EPUB to have accessible metadata, it has to include these three things. Access mode, accessibility features, and then accessibility hazards. And just really quickly what those are. So access mode is simply a human sensory perceptual system or cognitive faculty necessary to process or perceive the content. So examples given here would be textual, visual, auditory, or tactile. Secondly, we have accessibility features. So these are just simply, features and adaptations that contribute to the overall accessibility of the content. Examples we have here are alternative or alt text, extended descriptions, captions, things like that. And then finally, we have accessibility hazards. So this is any potential hazards that the content presents. And examples here would be flashing, motion simulation, sound. So we have access mode, what do you need to be able to perceive the content? We have accessibility features, what have we built into this EPUB to ensure that it has a high level of accessibility? And then accessibility hazards, just things that might be, people would not want to access, things they might want to be forewarned about before they access the EPUB. And then finally, we have accessible publications. So this is the second major section within the EPUB accessibility specification. And the first subsection here is WCAG conformance. So EPUB, it's easier to think about it as a set of documents, or within kind of how WCAG would refer to as a set of web pages as opposed to a single page. So when we're assessing the accessibility of an EPUB, typically what we're doing is we're taking a set of documents or a set of pages, and overall we're assessing the accessibility of that. So it's slightly different from WCAG. So what this does is it provides guidance on how you can apply WCAG, which again is a web standard, specifically to the EPUB format. And it does stipulate a pretty low level of conformance. So within the specification, it does ask that your EPUB be WCAG 2.0 level A, but it does strongly recommend you use the most recent version of WCAG, much like we're going to do today. And that's 2.2. And then level AA is kind of the standard level of conformance that we'll see across so many different things. Again, important to remind everyone here that AODA stipulates WCAG 2.0 level AA. But again, in line with what they're recommending here, we're going to recommend you kind of upgrade that to the most recent version. The second subsection within this section is EPUB requirements. And this is simply going to contain some requirements that are unique to EPUB. Okay. And the two very specific examples they give here are page navigation. The way you navigate an EPUB is very different from the way you would navigate a typical web page. And then synchronized text audio playback, which allows for a higher level of accessibility, but can be really kind of geared towards specific users. So that may be one of the examples of things where, you know, we're optimizing accessibility for a specific group and might create some challenge in terms of conformance for a broader accessibility standard. Finally, we have the conformance reporting section, and this requires you to include the level of conformance as well as who performed the evaluation. And this is going to be reported in the metadata and should be updated with any substantive change. So that's an overview of EPUB. I think EPUBs are fantastic. They're kind of a container for so many different things that we can create in terms of like for learning. So interactive content, multimedia and whatnot. A little bit harder to get into, but you can really kind of lean on a lot of great content authoring platforms that will do a lot of this work for you. But if you're going to get into EPUBs, I'd highly recommend just do some back reading in terms of look at these specifications so you know how you can better apply WCAG to them. And that will kind of take a little bit of the kind of mystery out of applying WCAG to, you know, a format that it wasn't designed for. So next, we're just going to talk quickly about readability standards because we wanted to highlight that before we moved on. Readability standards is going to be something we can apply to all the content we create. It's a AAA success criteria within WCAG. And it's really important in terms of, you know, this specific criterion acknowledges the fact that, you know, there are a lot of people with high levels of education and a lot of specified knowledge who can still benefit from having a readability standard. So even though you may see 9th grade reading level here, that's not exactly what we're talking about. There's a lot of ways we can meet readability standards. So we can either, if we cannot change the reading level of our content, we can create other content that has a lower reading level. But I think, you know, with a lot of other accessibility best practices, if we talk about like integrated description for accessible videos, there's a lot of way we can make our content more readable. We can scaffold learning. We can kind of front load important concepts. We can provide definitions for specialized phrases such as jargons and idioms. There's a lot we can do here without kind of being too explicit about it. We can be a little bit more graceful about it. But these things like, you know, providing definitions for words and phrases such as jargons and idioms, abbreviations and acronyms, please, in your everyday work, spell them out with your first use. We often, I think, just assume everyone will know what we're talking about. It's a great way to pack a lot of knowledge into a couple of letters, but it can be really confusing at the same time. Also, pronunciation for ambiguous or complex words should be provided. And related to the readability standards, a couple of things that we see that are very common accessibility issues kind of across different formats we wanted to highlight was defining language for your document is so very important, but also for specific sections within your document. So if you are creating a document that says maybe has some French quotes, some French phrases, we also want to make sure that that is defined within whatever format you are creating. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a system of technology. It's going to allow it to identify that and read it out properly. It's a huge help for screen reader users and just a common issue that's kind of easy to fix that we do see a lot of. The second thing we want to do is we want to make sure we're making file name, titles, headings, and links descriptive. This is kind of accessibility 101. But, file names and titles, I mean, I think I have about 8 different pieces of software running. I have probably about 100 tabs open. So when I'm scrolling through those, a lot of the time, either the file name or the title is the first thing that's read. So if we create those descriptively, that just allows users to quickly identify the content that they're trying to locate. And then headings and links, those are things that people use as navigation tools. So please just make sure those are descriptive as well. So we're going to move on to PDF accessibility standards right now. So there's 2 accessibility standards we're going to actually talk about with PDF. First, as with every other format, we're going to talk about WCAG. We need to apply WCAG to this format. So, WCAG is going to provide a really high level of accessibility if you're only using WCAG for your PDF. And again, WCAG does have PDF techniques that are very informative if you want to learn about those. The second standard, which is slightly less known, is PDF UA, or stands for Universal Accessibility. So this was an accessibility standard developed specifically for the PDF format. It does complement WCAG to help ensure an even higher level of accessibility. It is somewhat technical. There's 31 checkpoints, 136 failure conditions. About 2/3 of those failure conditions are automated checks, and about 1/3 are manual checks. So you do kind of need to know your stuff, but there's huge advantages if you're creating PDFs. So which standard do you use if you're creating PDFs? We would strongly recommend you use both, as they each have distinct strengths. So WCAG provides really great guidance around readability, which we just went over, but also distinguishable content. So if we think about things like contrast, text spacing, things like that. And that's going to help you to verify your PDF is AODA compliant ultimately, which is something we're all going to need to do. PDF UA is great because that's going to provide specific guidance around the appropriate use of tags to ensure not only accessibility, but a higher level of usability. So they have a syntax guide that kind of breaks down how you use tags appropriately, gives different examples. So if you want to learn how to tag a PDF appropriately, I'd highly recommend that resource. And ultimately, it's going to provide improved compatibility and adaptability. PDFs are notoriously miserable on mobile use. So if you do implement the PDF UA standard correctly, it does allow a certain amount of reflow. So then on our tinier screens, we can still kind of look through the content on the PDF without having to scroll in all the different directions. I think also in terms of like long-term viability of your PDF, if you use the PDF UA standard, your PDF, just similar to PDF A, it's going to be accessible lowercase a for a lot longer. We also want to highlight printable PDFs. So a lot of time with OERs, we're talking about providing as many formats as possible. So a lot of times we'll see people provide a printable version of a PDF specifically. A couple quick considerations: text size and spacing. Think about minimum 12 point font, and then use the WCAG guidance for text spacing because it's excellent regardless of what content you're creating. Color contrast, think if you have something that's really image heavy, will the information still be preserved if you are printing it in grayscale or black and white? So if you have a lot of, let's say, charts or graphs, if we print that out in grayscale or black and white, is that information completely gone? Because again, we're not going to have access to the text alternatives on a printed PDF. Provide full URLs and footnote or at the end of the resource. Again, we're using descriptive links for any kind of web-based content. So in order for folks who may want to print out the PDF, make sure you're providing a full URL. Access to multimedia content. Pressbooks does a great job. They will automatically put in a full URL for multimedia content, but do provide a link if you're not using Pressbooks for multimedia content. And then if you're using kind of interactive content like H5P, are there text equivalents you can provide? So if you're doing an interactive tool to kind of reinforce learning at the end of a segment, can we provide a text equivalent so that someone who may only be able to access the print version also has access to that? And then finally, before I pass it back to Lindsay, I just want to talk about document accessibility standards. Again, we're going to apply WCAG here as kind of the umbrella that sits above all this. So as much as possible, there is kind of a lesser known specification out there. So it's called the Non-Web Information and Communications Technology. It's got this snappy acronym WCAG 2 ICT, which is horrible. But what this does is basically for non-web software and documents, it's going to provide for specific guidance, and it's going to change some of the terminology and phrasing so it's more applicable to documents. It's a really great resource. If you are willing to sit through it, it'll help you to create more accessible documents. Also, authoring software provides a lot of guidance. So the most popular that we see in our day-to-day work is either Microsoft or Google. So Microsoft does a really great job in terms of video or text-based learning opportunities. They also have self-guided digital accessibility or specific document creation courses that you can access for free. Google doesn't have quite as robust accessibility help as available, but also is well worth reading through how to make your Google documents accessible. We strongly recommend with anything, use an accessibility checker, especially when you're newer to creating accessible content. Use either built-in, that would be Microsoft, or you'll need to utilize an extension if you're using Google products primarily. And always, always, always supplement that with manual testing. And I will mute and hand it over to Lindsay.
So I'm going to talk about standards for video or pre-recorded video. So there are WCAG standards for video. The challenge with video creation is, unlike other formats, there's no automated checker for doing that kind of assessment for this type of content. So all of your checking needs to be done manually, or optionally, if you're creating the video, all the planning needs to be done in advance to ensure that accessibility is being met. But if you want to assess content that's already been made, you can also go through this as well. So to make an accessible video, there has to be a text alternative for both the audio and the visual content. So videos are complex because they have multiple elements kind of that work together to create meaning. So oftentimes we see the challenge where visual content isn't necessarily included in the voiceover or in the transcript. So really making sure whatever meaning or purpose that visual content is being created, that you can assess that and make sure that it's being included, either adding it into the voiceover so that description is there, or making sure to add it afterwards into a kind of more of a described transcript. So you need to include captions. The best practice is a minimum duration of 1 to 4 seconds, or a maximum of 32 characters per line. So you also want to avoid text on the screen that is not included in the voiceover. So we always want to make sure that we're including whatever is being said in the voiceover as well as what's on screen. And you need to include important notes about the audio, both in the captions as well as in the transcript. So whether that's the speaker or if there's music or sound effects. Ensuring sufficient color contrast between foreground and background. Avoid quick flashing lights. So flashing images, lights, whatever that might be. And you want to make sure there's also either low or no audio, a background audio that would obscure kind of the main voiceover. So to help with this process, Ryan and I created this OER accessibility standards video and audio assessment tool. We can open that, and Laura has the link to share in the chat as well. So this tool is really just to identify the standards that need to be met for audio and for video. I changed, that's the SharePoint link. Oh, I will share the other link. I moved it to Google Drive. It's okay, it's still there. Sorry, I just saw that Laura shared a SharePoint link, but actually it's a Google Drive link now, but I will share that later. So basically we've gone through and identified all of the different success criterion for accessible video, and identified kind of the level and whether or not it's AODA required. So as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, there are 2 exemptions where you don't have to provide captions for live videos, and then audio descriptions for pre-recorded videos as well are not a requirement. So they're there, but they're not required by AODA, at least at this moment in time. So we also included the readable standards as well, our success criterion there as well, just because we think that it's a great thing to think about regardless of the format that you're using. We can click over to audio, even though I haven't done the audio slide. I'll just show you quickly. This is the same kind of thing, this assessment tool you can use for the audio as well. So we've included this a way to assess it. So you can take notes, feel free to download and create copies. You can change it in order to meet whatever requirements you want to make it. Okay, so this was created using WCAG 2.2. All right, standards. Oh, we're going the wrong way. We can move to the audio now. Yeah. Okay, so we've highlighted the WCAG audio standards that you need to meet. Again, you need to use a manual check in order to make sure that you're meeting these. And it's basically it's much more simple than video because it's only one element that you have to think about. But provide a text alternative, include important notes about the audio, like the speaker, music in the transcript, and then really think about whether or not you need background audio and making sure that it's a low level so as not to overwhelm the main voiceover.
Okay, I'm going to very quickly go over some resources that we just want to supply to everyone. So for EPUB, we have linked to the specification for the EPUB format, as well as the two accessibility specifications and the EPUB accessibility techniques. We did want to provide an accessibility checker. So this is one ACE by Daisy, which is a good accessibility checker for EPUB. Again, that's not all. You're still going to have to do manual testing and some usability testing. So for PDF, the PDF accessibility checker or PAC checker, I found to be by far the best. That's going to test both PDF UA and WCAG compliance. It has a screen reader preview, so it's a kind of a visual preview of what a screen reader is seeing when it's accessing the different tags. And if you're not familiar with PDF UA and some of the benefits, there's just linked a very short page on why you might want to use PDF UA. We've linked the WCAG 2.2 PDF techniques. And then also, if you want to get into PDF UA, the tagged PDF best practice guide syntax, a very large, very technical document, but it's really good to reference when you start using tags appropriately. Again, it gives examples and things like that. And when we're talking about actually testing for PDF UA compliance, the Matterhorn protocol is the actual conformance testing model. So resources for documents, again, we have that non-web information and communications technology. So just kind of applying WCAG in just something that's going to be a little bit more usable for software and for documents. And then we also have the guidance from Microsoft Office and Google, again, just because we see those so commonly used within our work. So for video and audio, so making audio and video accessible, again, from W3C, so World Wide Web Consortium, the same people who put out WCAG. That's kind of their guide is really good on audio and video accessibility. The video accessibility rubric, this is something that Lindsay and I created for our work here at University of Guelph. So we did a review of all the video that was created publicly on our YouTube account. This is the rubric we used, and then we've supplemented that with this new video and audio accessibility assessment tool. So between the two of these, I think there's a lot of good stuff there in terms of assessing the accessibility of video or audio. So for the web, again, this is going to be really important stuff to learn. The first thing here linked is the WCAG 2 overview. It's really, if you're new to this, it's going to go over the overview of how WCAG is structured, maybe what's a little bit different between the different versions of WCAG. And we've also linked the quick reference here. The quick reference is really great. It allows you to kind of filter through the different versions and different aspects. A great way to kind of break down a very kind of comprehensive standard. So we also want to provide an accessibility checker for the web. There's so many out there. There's so many great ones. The Wave checker we use a lot. It's really easy to use. It's put out by WebAIM, and they do so much great work for accessibility. We've also linked the Open Library OER submission guide. So you're all going to create your wonderful OERs for eCampus Ontario. You're going to want to review that first. There's an accessibility section. Pressbook accessibility. So if you're looking to get into EPUBs, Pressbooks is a great way to do it. They've got a really good accessibility section. And then BC Accessibility Toolkit. So BC Campus, it's outside of Ontario, kind of not as relevant because they don't have OEDA, but they do have a lot of great resources that we did want to highlight there. And then H5P accessibility. So interactive content is fantastic to reinforce learning, but there are some accessibility challenges to meet that. So we've linked to that. It's going to outline, which question types are accessible and which aren't. And then summary.
So we do have a reflection question, but I'm also very much aware of the time, and I want to make sure that we have time for questions. So I'll just read it and you can take time, but we'll move into the summary and an opportunity to ask questions. So there is a reflection, so you can take a moment to reflect or just think about it afterwards. If you want to identify 2 topics you want to learn more about, and then identify maybe one of the resources we shared. I know it's a lot. You want to explore to make your OERs more accessible. So just thinking about maybe pulling something out of all of the giant stuff that we gave you, and seeing if there's 1 or 2 things that might actually be useful for you in the work that you're doing right now. You can move. Okay, so basically, this whole session is when you're creating or assessing OERs, use the most current standards to be proactive in creating accessible content. Technology has changed a lot since all of this started with the AODA, so it's really thinking about how we can be proactive to ensure that we have ongoing accessibility and proper planning. So review content and test for accessibility using a variety of tools and techniques. We already mentioned WAVE, whatever built-in accessibility checkers there are to identify potential barriers, but always accompanying that with a manual check as well, because tools can't do everything for you. And then test content for usability and not just compliance. So standards can only take us so far when it comes to accessibility. It's that usability piece that's so important to make sure that people can actually use the content that we're creating. So that brings us to the end. Do you have any questions or comments? Feel free to raise your hand or add anything to the chat.
It's Laura. Just before we open the floor to any questions, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you both for this presentation today. There were so many great links and information. We are going to share this with everyone. This is just such an amazing resource, and thank you so much as well for the tool that you've been developing and sharing that content with us. I'm really excited to go back and to go through a lot of this great content. As Lindsay had mentioned, if there are any questions, we're going to stop the recording now.